Maverick News. The world is watching. In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange bedfellows.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Strange Bedfellows. I'm your host, Lori Spencer, with my co-host, Rick Walker, the one and only from Maverick News.
And I'm the strange one.
No, I'm the strange one. Actually, we're both strange. That's why we make Strange Bedfellows, right?
That's right.
We always have strange people on this show, but a good kind of strange, you know? But we're all pretty strange.
Yeah, we're all unique.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. And we have a great guest joining us today.
Yes, we do. Our Maverick News correspondent all the way over in Crimea, Russia or Ukraine, depending on which side of the war you're on, I guess. It's disputed territory. And that's kind of the whole part of the topic that we're talking about tonight is disputed territories that lead to world wars. And Kevin's right over there in the thick of it between Russia and Ukraine and that disputed peninsula. And, of course, another disputed peninsula over in the Middle East is blowing up. And, Rick, since the attacks, October 7th on Israel by the Hamas terrorists, man, it's been almost a month ago now.
Wow.
A month ago this week. Wow.
Yeah.
What a month it's been. And all the resulting carnage that we've witnessed since with all these Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. The topic of the show tonight is, we're seeing an alarming rise in anti-Jewish sentiment all around the world. And the title of tonight's show, episode 19, is Never Again? ? Antisemitism rising. And, there have been reports of, we've seen it. We've seen all these pro-Hamas or pro-Palestine demonstrations. We've seen synagogues around the world being defaced with swastikas and all kinds of anti-Jewish hate posted online. If you're on social media at all, you can't miss it. And something else you can't miss if you're really paying attention is that neo-Nazis, white supremacists, have been contributing to all this anti-Semitic chatter online. And oftentimes you hear the same rhetoric that you hear from Hamas. It's like they're in complete agreement with one another. Even right now, even people who don't even care about the plight of the Palestinian people feel emboldened right now to just openly express their hatred of Jews. And it's not just in the United States. We've been talking about it all week on Maverick News up in Canada. You've got that new Nazi party in Canada. Tell our viewers just a brief version of what our week has been like at Maverick News if they haven't been watching.
Well, it's something that we've been following closely for at least the last 8 months or so, maybe longer. It's a First Nations-based anti-Semitic ethno-nationalist political movement that is poised to become a national party. They're filing paperwork to do that. It's going to be called the Thunderbird Nationalist or Naturalist Party. The ideology is inspired by, rooted in the same ideology that we saw, that we witnessed in World War II with Nazi Germany. In fact, the founder, Adrian the Realist,
Adrian the Fascist is what I call him.
Yeah, little Adolf.
Little Adolf.
He's made very specific references in various social media posts and interviews to Hitler, to you know, to the ideology. He absolutely has made it clear that he does not like Jews. He said so right on this program. I think the second time we had him on, and I've had him on multiple times, not because I want to promote anything that he's doing, but because he is getting some traction, enough that it is absolutely something we need to be concerned about. So we've exposed it because it is accelerating.
Yeah, we interviewed him on Halloween, which I thought was very appropriate.
Yes.
The booking time just worked out perfectly. I mean, that's the scariest thing I can think of.
It's complex, it's a complex thing, because what I'm seeing is it's anti-Semitism, but in a very Western, it's not a Western thing, it's a global thing. Anti-Semitism is not necessarily just about the Jews. It's more complex than that. It's a postmodern phenomenon that it's postmodernism, and so they've been working up to this, Laurie. If you look at the narratives that have been playing out over the last, especially 3 years, accelerated because of the oppression that came with the pandemic.
Right.
The twisted, disguised language, or the language used to disguise the anti-Semitism, is now being displayed in a more blatant, obvious, unmasked way.
I'll say. And it's taking all these new twists and turns that there is no historical precedent for, like, for example, the new Thunderbird Nationalist Party there, with the First Nations being involved. I mean, this isn't the usual suspects. Usually you would expect white supremacists, right?
You would.
These are Native American Nazis? I mean, that's a new one on me.
Perhaps, but it makes absolute sense, because people need to understand that prejudice and bigotry is not isolated to a single ethnicity. It's prejudice, prejudging, and it's about favoring your tribe, if you will. And I don't mean that in a First Nations way specifically. I mean whatever tribe you may belong to, even globally. So it's we'll get into it more on the broadcast. It absolutely makes sense, though, when you really kind of dig down into it, because it's anti-Semitism is rooted in prejudice and bigotry and hate. And what you see too is the same motivating factors that come with the desire to liberate. It's even those things, emotionally and ideologically, you're walking a fine line there, because as you try to liberate, those same motivations can take you to a very dark place where you end up oppressing. So this is why you end up with these people who have good intentions to begin with, but their ideology leads them into the abyss. It's a complex psychological and ideological thing, but we're witnessing that right now.
And even though you've been working this story here at Maverick News and following Adrian and the origins of this Thunderbird party for several months, it's taken kind of a new twist, and it's echoing what we're hearing coming out of the Middle East and what you hear from Hamas. They talk about their stolen land, and they're going to reclaim it. And the colonialism. Yes.
It's postmodernism, postmodernist political ideological theory, critical race theory. It's these things converging. And it plays into this globalist agenda, but it's anti-colonialism, and then different political powers, different countries, they latch onto this, they exploit it, they capitalize on it to further their interests politically around the globe, whether it's Russia, the United States, China, India, Australia. It doesn't matter. They're all involved in it. But there is absolutely choreography that's going on here, and that's why these things are converging right now. And you can see that this, if you boil it right down, it's the same issues in Israel Palestine that are playing out right here in Canada between
Exactly.
First Nations, the government, the settlers. It
Mhm.
really boils right down to the exact same issues. Or even if you go to Barbados, where they decided to decouple from the monarchy. So these
Right.
things all are interconnected, and it all goes back through history, where the roots of all this started with, Christopher Columbus coming over. So
Mhm.
it goes back that far, and it's all intertwined.
We are all on stolen land. That's the bottom line. And
Even
over the
even
sorry, I was
Hamas
going to say,
yesterday. I'm sorry. Even Hamas yesterday says that Spain is stolen land, and now we have to give back Spain. Where the where
wow,
the where are the people supposed to go? There won't be any room for any humans at
where does
all
it
anymore on the
stop?
planet.
Yeah, where does it stop? And
Yeah.
just over the weekend, there was that pro-Palestinian mob, shouting anti-Semitic slogans and demanding to know where the Jews were, storming the airport, excuse me, in Dagestan, which is a mostly Muslim republic and tonight. So I wanted to bring on Strange Bedfellows, our Maverick News correspondent over there in Russia, over in Crimea, Kevin Michalitzi. He's an American living on a disputed tract of land currently being fought over between Russia and Ukraine. And I want to discuss, the reason that Israel was created in the first place in 1948. We've got some history to talk about tonight, folks. We're going to talk about the history of the Jews in Ukraine, in Poland, in the former USSR, the pogroms that led to the Holocaust, and the collaboration of the Arabs and the Palestinians with the Nazis in World War II. Kevin will also give us more details on the aftermath of the Dagestan riot, Putin's expression of support for the people in Palestine, and also he's going to address some of these Western allegations of anti-Semitism in Russia today. You hear a lot about the Nazis in Ukraine, but there is some Nazism in Russia as well. We'll find out if that's over-exaggerated propaganda from the West or if there's some truth to it. And, this week, November 9th, will mark it's been going on for 30 years now, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the International Day Against Fascism and Anti-Semitism. It's an annual event every year on November 9th, honoring the victims of the Kristallnacht Nazi pogrom of 1938, and more broadly, victims of the Holocaust and fascism throughout history everywhere. So tonight, we hope to raise awareness about the dangers of nationalism, racism, anti-Semitism, and neo-Nazism today, because they're saying the quiet part out loud now, and we all know where that leads. So I'd like to bring in our guest from Russia, beautiful Russia, where it's in the afternoon over there, I believe. Hey, Kevin.
It is. Hey,
Good to
Rick.
see
Hey,
you.
Lori.
Hey, Kevin.
So,
Welcome
hey,
back.
thanks. Rick was talking about the First Nations people. I wonder if they realize that they stole land too. The original inhabitants of Canada actually crossed the land bridge from Russia. They were the Chukchuk Indians.
Right.
So how far back do you go in history before you determine who stole what from whom?
Actually, you just hit on exactly the thing I wanted to share with people. So I was going to do it later, but I'll do it right now. We'll only take a moment. Okay, all of these arguments about who is here first, it's all a bunch of hooey.
Bunch of malarkey, man.
Okay, because look at this. All right, just look at this. The world is just a big jigsaw puzzle. Let's go back, say, 160 million or 200 million years.
Right.
And, everything was connected.
All that land was stolen from somebody somewhere sometime, then stolen by the next guys who stole it from those guys.
Or maybe just maybe the point is that we're all just on the land, and it was all one big land mass at one point that split apart, and then it drifted apart because of tectonic shifts.
That's
So how far back you want to go?
Great
We're all
point.
human beings, and we all
190
came from
million
the Earth.
years, Rick.
190 million years. Okay.
Yeah.
I
10
want to go
million years
195.
before your picture starts.
Well,
you
here
know,
on Strange
it's-
Bedfellows, we just, since it's a Saturday show, Saturday night, we kind of like to catch you up on the news of the week. And boy, it's been an eventful week. There's been so much going on. When we're talking about the rise of anti-Semitism, we see it really exploding over in Europe, which for students of history like me is pretty scary, especially when you see it happening in places like Vienna, Austria. Yikes. Take a look at
As we
this,
continue to
guys.
follow the breaking news out of the Middle East, you are looking at live pictures of a group gathered in Ramallah after Friday prayers. There have been a series of significant protests over the course of the last several weeks. We will continue to monitor what's happening here as well. At the same time, there has been a significant increase of anti-Semitic acts in both the United States and around the world since that October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. FBI Director Chris Wray said this week that anti-Semitism is reaching, quote, historic levels in the U.S. In Austria, the Jewish community has been targeted in an incident that carries disturbing reminders of the past. CNN's Frederick Pleitgen joins us now from Vienna. Fred, reading about this cemetery holds extra significance for Jews in the area. The room where you stand was actually burned down last in 1938 by the Nazis.
Yeah, it certainly was, and it's definitely something that's extremely troubling to the Jewish community here in Austria, and specifically, of course, here in Vienna. You can look around. I'm actually inside that ceremonial hall that was set on fire. You can see that the windows there that have been destroyed to then obviously put fire here into the room, that those have been sort of patched up a little bit. But everything that was inside, including very valuable scriptures for the Jewish community here in Vienna, was destroyed. This is an incident that happened here in Vienna, but it's also part of what many Jews in Europe are seeing as a huge, steep rise in anti-Semitic incidents that has a lot of folks here on the continent very worried. Here's what we're seeing.
Valuable Torah scrolls and prayer books reduced to ashes after an arson attack on this ceremonial hall on the Jewish part of Vienna's main cemetery. The last time this very hall was set on fire was almost to the day 85 years ago by the Nazis on Kristallnacht, Chief Rabbi Yaron Engelmeyer tells me.
How big is the damage, not just in terms of obviously the room itself, but spiritually for you, for the Jewish community here?
I think it takes us back to times where the books were burned, and it is an attack on the spiritual values of the religion and of humanity, which happened here.
A swastika on the outer wall leaves few questions about the anti-Semitic nature of the attack.
It should worry us, all of the people in the free world, about what's going on in the streets right now, and anti-Semitic attacks are just the top of the what's going on.
Since Hamas's October 7th attack on southern Israel, murdering more than 1,400 people and kidnapping hundreds, and Israel's military response in Gaza, which has also caused many casualties, anti-Semitic incidents have skyrocketed by about 300% in Austria, the head of Vienna's Jewish community tells me.
We are anxious. People are thinking about their life. The first thinking is Jewish life possible in Austria? The second thinking is Jewish life possible in Europe or in the world?
With pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel demos sweeping across the continent, Jewish groups say anti-Semitism is not only getting more prevalent, but uglier. From plastering stars of David on Jewish homes in Paris to a Molotov cocktail attack on one of the main synagogues in Berlin, and near daily assaults and insults in various European countries. Today, just hours after the cemetery attack, Vienna's Jewish community hosted Israelis whose relatives were killed or kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. In Tal Yeshurun's family, 4 murdered, 7 kidnapped. Tal lives in Europe, but while he's publicly advocating for the hostages in everyday life, he feels he has to hide his Jewish identity.
Not to be associated with anything written in Hebrew, not to speak Hebrew, not to go to places where considered Jewish, like a synagogue or things like that.
While many European leaders have come out strongly against the rising tide of anti-Semitism, the head of the European Jewish Association says it's not enough.
We know exactly when we are in danger, and we are now in danger. European leaders, we need you right now to act. Never again is now, not tomorrow, not next week, is now.
But as much as there is fear, there's also a sense of defiance. Rabbi Engelmeyer himself painting over the Nazi slurs on the cemetery wall, eager to show his Jewish community will not be intimidated by anti-Semitic attacks.
And you know, Phil, the Jewish community here in Vienna certainly got a boost also last night when there was a Sea of Light memorial that took place where thousands of people showed up to show solidarity with Israel, but of course, first and foremost, also with the hostages that are still being held by Hamas, guys.
Really important story. Fred Pleiken, thank you.
Can you even imagine being Jewish at that cemetery that's been burned down before on Kristallnacht, burned down again, and having to paint over the swastikas painted on the wall?
Look, there's a problem here, right? Because you just ran a CNN report, which is mainstream media, and you can't trust the mainstream media, and the mainstream media is owned by the elites. And who is the elites? The elites are... Who controls the media?
The Jews.
Juden.
So you just ran a bunch of Jewish propaganda anyway, so no one's going to believe what you just told them.
Right.
You know, the guy who was talking about, not wanting to look Jewish, I've got some friends in the UK where at work they were told, do not dress like Jews, do not talk like Jews, do not give anybody the idea that you're Jewish at all. So...
In Crimea?
No, UK.
In the UK.
Yeah.
It's a problem everywhere. And speaking of the UK, I wanted to show you, Kevin, how the British are covering the report of the riot at the airport in Dagestan this week. Of course, this is how they would spin it. I did bring some mainstream media reports so that we can pick them apart, so that our viewers can evaluate all the various types of propaganda that we're seeing in different parts of the world, right? You just saw how the American media is reporting it. That's CNN out of their bureau.
But before you show this one, let's point out that also sometimes mainstream media gets it right.
Well,
propaganda is about truth with a little bit of falsity in it. So a lot of what was in that report was correct.
Of course.
Right.
It happened, folks. They're not making it up, but it happened. And they do have some decent reporters in their bureaus around the world.
Things are discredited, right? It's just like...
I thought the guy did a pretty good job.
Yeah, it was,
It's a solid report. We'll see what you think of this one. This is Britain's Channel 4.
The social media mob went all real world in Dagestan yesterday evening. A crowd of hundreds stormed the airport in the capital city, Makhachkala, at around 7 p.m. A plane was arriving from Tel Aviv. Unsubstantiated rumors amplified on Telegram channels said that there were Jewish refugees on board fleeing the war in the Middle East. The mob was headed for that plane, now sitting on the runway. The Russian Republic of Dagestan is majority Muslim, has no recent history of extreme displays of anti-Semitism, though, at least nothing like this. The crowd first got through into the airport concourse, marauding through security. Their intent was clear from the chanting. They were looking for Jewish people. Frightened airport staff are heard saying there's no one here. The mob heads out onto the runway. Terrified passengers on a plane watch the crowd arrive. The pilot makes an announcement. There's an angry mob outside, he says, trying to figure out where we've come from. It's likely we might get hurt. Don't try to open the doors. The crowd eventually focus on this plane, believing it's the one that's arrived from Tel Aviv. A technician on the ground is asked, are the people on board Russian or Jewish? They interrogate others, asked to see passports. Eventually, security services arrive and start arresting people. Dagestan is one of the Russian republics. It's situated between the Black Sea and the Caspian, shares borders with Georgia and Azerbaijan. It's majority Muslim, but ethnically diverse, has a tiny Jewish population. Today, Vladimir Putin said the incident was orchestrated by the West and Ukraine, aimed at undermining the unity of the Russian Federation. There is another perspective, though. As with many of the poorer Russian republics, Dagestan is feeling the squeeze economically and is sending thousands of soldiers into what's becoming for so many young men the killing fields of Ukraine.
So all these factors, I think, are causing the Russian government to try and deflect attention from that problem to, they would rather create a divisive divide and rule situation rather than have some sort of unification amongst the different ethnic groups against Moscow. So I think we're entering quite a dangerous phase in North Caucasus, where it's not just in Dagestan, remember, there was also in Kabardino-Balkaria attacks on the Jewish center in the capital. And again, I do believe this was engineered by the FSB to try and deflect attention from a growing movement of Circassian nationalism in the North Caucasus.
Were there ulterior motives behind last night's rampage is one question. If you were Jewish, running the gauntlet of the mob as you left the airport, here's another question. What would they have done if they'd found me?
Oh, wow. Orchestrated by the FSB?
Yeah.
Kevin, they're blaming each other, of course, right? Russia's
Of
blaming Ukrainian intelligence and they're blaming Russian intelligence. What's your take? You're there on the ground in Russia. Tell us.
Well, first, let me correct what Putin said in the video that they showed. What he was saying at that time was, I have to ask a question. Is it possible to help Palestine by attacking people? He went on and said, after the Hamas attack, Israel has the right to protection, but he called for a solution to the Palestine-Israeli conflict through peaceful negotiations. So they respun what he actually said.
Of course they did.
Yes, there was a mob. It's always a mob. They estimate there were 500 people there, plus or minus.
Looks about
and
right.
Yeah. Now,
Hundreds.
It's the same as with the hotel. Same 500 guys. So there was a rally that morning that was coordinated by this Telegram channel, Morning Dagestan, in support of Palestine. It was held in Cherkassk, and they were, call them what you want. They were, mad Muslims. They were, SBU agents, whatever. This particular Telegram channel and 3 others have actually been traced back to the SBU in Ukraine. Rick asked me this the other night. How do we know that that's the case? We actually have Zelensky, and let me find his statement on this. Because I pulled these all out. Oh yeah, this Telegram channel, yes, you were correct earlier when we talked. It was taken off of Telegram, but it's reappeared under a different name. And they are requiring people to sign up before they will let you in to see what they're talking about. So they're trying to prevent like the FSB from seeing what's being said there. It doesn't
Do you happen
work.
to know the new name of the new Telegram channel?
I do, but I'm not going to help people out by pointing them at it.
I gotcha.
So
Okay.
we had that one. It currently has brand new 26,251 subscribers as of about a half hour ago. There's another one with a guy who almost sort of kind of looks like he's Muslim, except he's, you know, wearing a ski cap, not the kind of attire they would normally wear. And it's calling for violence. And these channels are actually being pulled down. Now,
By whom?
we have
who's pulling them down? Any idea?
Apple, Google, Telegram, and the FSB is active in identifying these and reporting them.
I see.
So we have a blogger who his name's Ponomarev, and he's a foreign agent, and he was the owner of this Morning Dagestan channel. And he had a telephone conversation that was recorded with Arestovich in Ukraine and admitted the fact of coordinating the protest movements at the airport through the Telegram channels with the money that he was provided by Arestovich in Ukraine.
That's our money. Most likely,
Yeah,
that's our money.
It's your money.
Yeah.
And, you know, it says, this is how they are. First, the brothers come out and give the gas, and then they laugh at us. The provocateur who crippled dozens of Dagestani lives. This was the comment by a reader. It was actually one of his readers who exposed him on this. So the prosecutor general's office, him and another blogger, they've filed criminal charges against them according to the Russian Federation criminal code against extremist activities. Zelensky made a statement through Mikhail Podolyak, one of his spokesmen, and he has said that he has a strategy for defeating Russia. And there's the typical, we're going to have a series of defeats on the battlefield, the collapse of the Russian defense ministry, unauthorized return of military personnel to Russia after they have failures at the front. But the big one is massive internal unrest within Russia. And this is what Russians in general are viewing this as. This is Maidan 2023.
Yeah.
We have a relatively small group of extremists being turned up by money from the SBU instead of the CIA in Ukraine in 2014. So you get these few people who stir up a group of, like you say, the nationalists or, people who are willing to go along with the crowd and causing these problems. And this is what Russians view this as.
Interesting. Very interesting. Like you say, the way it's being spun by, Ukraine, by the Western media, especially this week, they've been saying it for several years now, and saying it a lot more since the war began, is they find a few Nazis or extremists in Russia, and then they have counter propaganda when the Russians talk about Ukraine's obvious Nazi problem. They say, well, yeah, but they got Nazis in Russia too. They say that Russia has an anti-Semitism problem. I'm going to show you a clip here from Ukrainian television, UATV. It's in English. And it's, obviously it's in English. So it's designed to impress a Western audience.
A Zelensky channel, by the way.
Yeah, it sure is. It's run by the Ukrainian government. So this is what they have to say about big bad Russia.
Anti-Semitism and racism are increasingly echoing in the hearts of Russians, from bold slogans we can repeat to manipulations on the subject of victory in World War II. And from the beginning of a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, some Russians moved on to undisguised calls for the destruction of entire states. Ukraine will become a secondary state that won't take part in anything, and we will take this land for ourselves.
This Nazi carrion, you ask what we will do with them, destroy, and we won't ask everything that has to do with it. We didn't finish them off in World War II, we'll finish them off now. It needs to be wiped off the face of the earth.
Whom, Ukraine?
Yes. Why is it needed?
What for?
Poland, simply to the hip.
The imperial ambitions of the Russians are fueled not only by propagandists on federal channels. They have been demonstrating military maps of the offensive against Europe for a long time and promising to incinerate it with a nuclear strike. Anti-Semitic and racist sentiments are also being voiced by the country's top leadership. A statement by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov about Hitler's alleged Jewish roots shocked the Israeli government. This is how he answered a question from a TV presenter of the Italian media about how President Volodymyr Zelensky could be a Nazi if he is a Jew. Israel is already demanding a public apology from Lavrov.
Well, I think that Hitler also had Jewish origins, so it means nothing. For a long time now we've been hearing the wise Jewish people say that the biggest anti-Semites are the Jews themselves. As we say, the family has its black sheep.
However, one should not expect denials from the mouth of Lavrov, experts say. After the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia's aggressive policy has reached its peak. The official Kremlin is no longer shy in expressions and shows its true face.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation explained on its website and posted an announcement on social networks that literally says they paid attention to the anti-historical statement of Israeli Foreign Minister Lapid. There is such a minister. This is the official stance. It was announced that yesterday the Israeli Foreign Ministry summoned the Russian ambassador. Apparently, he was presented with a note, and publicly we heard that they offered Lavrov to apologize, to take his words back into his mouth, but we haven't heard anything of the sort. Therefore, I do not see a reservation in this, not an accidental exaggeration. I think this is a change in Moscow's position.
Some experts attribute such rhetoric to Russia's potential loss in the war against Ukraine. Allegedly realizing its helplessness, the Kremlin is trying to keep its face, at least in front of an internal audience.
They are well aware that they are losing the war, and to create this aura that the whole world is against us and we are the only righteous people in this world. Obviously, this is a part of this technology. Everything else is irrationality, because if Russia had thought rationally, its leadership, they would not have started a war with Ukraine.
Why are there so many people in Russia who want to exterminate enemies and use nuclear weapons against thousands of civilians? These are the consequences of decades of Putin regime's propaganda, experts explain.
Almost a quarter of a century of this darkness of Putin's obscurantism and propaganda and everything that accompanies it, because Russia in its current form is a rigid authoritarian system with totalitarian elements. That is, it could be described as totalitarian, but there are still some freedoms that have not been yet taken away, like freedom of access to the internet, freedom of entry and exit. It is limited for obvious reasons, but it still theoretically exists. As soon as they cancel it, it will be a complete totalitarian system. But as far as information and propaganda are concerned, it was an absolute lack of freedom all quarter of a century.
After the end of the war, directly on the battlefield, it will take more than a decade to treat Russians from propaganda, experts say. An example of the aftermath of World War II, started by Hitler's Germany, showed that the aggressor had been washing away traces of genocide and the murders of entire nations for generations.
The first treatment is our victory. The second step that should be taken is a so-called denazification. What Russia wanted to apply to Ukraine should be applied to their regime. Accordingly, this should be done through international tribunals. The regime itself has been condemned at the political level. At the legislative level in the Russian Federation, this sin must also be condemned. This will be a very long process.
And of course, as experts say, it will be necessary to get rid of the symbols of this war. Among them is the notorious letter Z, used today by Russians propagandists. Reported by Marina Stepanenko, Larissa Zubenko, UATV News.
Well, Kevin, what do you think about that? Is that the pot calling the kettle black, or is there something to these allegations? You tell me. You live there.
Well, Elinsky won't be able to go to the U because there won't be a letter anymore. So, you know, Rick and I talked about this a few nights ago. You know, yes, there's propaganda on all sides of the fence.
It's an information war, like your channel says.
It's an information war. And, you know, the only thing I can say about it is living here and dealing with it here. I see that if you compare the level of propaganda that Russia produces compared to the amount of propaganda that the United States and the rest of the West produces, the United States is king in propaganda, have been for years.
We're number one.
That's right. You're number one. The Ukraine war was the most propagandized operation in a long time. That was until Gaza and Israel came up. That is even worse. The propaganda that is out there for that conflict is much, much worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, the Ukrainians it's a Ukrainian TV, and they're putting it out there for the Ukrainian people to keep them behind their special military operation.
Of course.
Yet you have, and I don't remember which guy it was, one of their heads of their military said just a couple of days ago that they have no chance to win this conflict with Russia, that it's time to start negotiating. But, you know, the Ukrainian government has puppet masters, and they aren't getting the, you know, the amount of attention that they were getting before Israel. You know, there was a comment that came out, 7 o'clock this morning, that there's concern amongst the US and European officials that the special military operation, they used war, has reached a stalemate, and there is no ability to continue providing aid to Ukraine. The Biden administration is also worried that Ukraine is running out of forces while Russia has a seemingly endless supply. Ukraine is also struggling with recruiting and has recently seen public protests about some of Zelensky's open-ended conscription requirements. Now, these are the things you are not going to hear on a Ukrainian television channel. We have a lot of friends there, and they do not hear these things. Everything they hear is how well the conflict is going for Ukraine. They're winning. They're taking back kilometers of territory. They never hear about the people who are dead. They just go missing, and mothers protest of, gee, where is my son? If he's dead, I want to be paid for his death according to their law. But because nobody knows where these guys are, these mothers, these daughters, these wives never get the salaries that they're due. They don't get paid the, you know, the life benefits. So people are starting to stir in Ukraine as well.
Interesting. I'm not surprised. Rick, do you want to chime in?
I think the on the surface, this stuff doesn't make sense, but it does make sense if you look at it from an aerial view, and you understand that, again, this anti-Semitism that we're seeing is not, it's postmodernist anti-Semitism. It is often it's without, you don't need the Jews to have it. For instance, Russia is aligning with Palestine and Hamas, which seems to be fascistic, but at the same time, the Israelis are being portrayed as the new Nazis, which also doesn't really make sense. So it's, really, these countries, they're like a bunch of gangsters. They act in their own best interests. Common people are cannon fodder, and they'll play these geopolitical games out, and a lot of people die in the process. You really need to dig down and look at the real politics under the surface to understand why all this stuff is playing out the way it's playing out. Sometimes somebody calling for peace really wants war. They just want peace for a while because it's an advantage to them to do that, or they'll align with an enemy because it's in their political interest to do so, because the enemy of their enemy is their friend for now until later. So these things to people, it may not make sense, but it sort of does make sense.
What you said right there makes so much sense to me as a historian who studied especially the 20th century. The pogroms go back hundreds of years, especially across Europe. But in the 20th century, when we saw the pogroms, for example, after the Russian Civil War and after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, it wasn't just about the Jews. Like you just said, the Jews were a convenient scapegoat. Right. But it was about geopolitics. It was about stolen land. It was about a land dispute. And most of all, in that case, and again, I see this repeating in the 21st century right now, it was about communism. It was about the rise of communism and the fear that struck in the hearts of the capitalist countries, the fascist countries, as fascism was just being born over there. I just, after seeing that clip from Ukrainian television, accusing the Russians of being Nazis, when I look around Russia, and I look at Russia a lot, I don't see random gangs of Nazis parading through the streets of Moscow. I don't see that on the streets of St. Petersburg. But in Ukraine, you can't swing a dead cat, it seems, without hitting a Nazi. And in all the major cities, they're freaking everywhere. And so I have to counter that, what I consider to be BS. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in Russia. I'm just saying it doesn't exist at the levels that it exists in Ukraine. I want to show you a quick clip that kind of ties
before you do that, I want to address something there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Reality is Lavrov did make that statement. I don't remember the context of it.
It's about a year ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say actually went in one side, not the other. So
I don't know what happens. Damn. Maybe it'll come back to you while I
so
play
go
this
for
clip. This just kind of ties the past of Ukraine, the ugly past of Ukraine, and ties the past and the present together. Well, let's go to Lvov, however you want to pronounce it.
In 1939, Lviv, or Lvov at that time, was under Polish control. The Soviets came in 1939 and occupied the city and arrested a lot of people.
Очень много деятелей культуры, науки, духовенства было арестовано и брошено в тюрьмы. И вот в 1941 году, когда приходили немцы, как ненадежный элемент, этих всех людей расстреляли в львовских тюрьмах.
5 июля во Львове колоссальный погром. вызваны, конечно, инспирированы и подготовлены также нацистами.
They got ordinary Ukrainians to kill people, and it was pretty easy to convince them to do it. They opened up the prisons and they released a lot of the prisoners, but also uncovered the graves of people who had been killed there.
Было несколько десятков тел со следами страшных увечий. КГБ поработало.
Много в НКВД на службе было евреев.
They took a lot of pictures of this scene and spread propaganda that this was what the Jews had done.
Ну и вы можете себе представить реакцию людей, которые узнали своих родных и близких.
Word spread very quickly about this.
Погром страшный, 5000 человек погибло, которые никакого отношения к тюрьме Бригитки, естественно, не имели.
Jews were rounded up out of their houses and beaten and stripped and shot and murdered in other ways as well.
Я не знаходжу собі місця, вибігаю з дому, цілу ніч мандрую вулицями міста.
When I traveled out to the west, I couldn't believe the anti-Semitism that I saw out there. In Lviv, it seems like it's natural.
Що ви думаєте зараз про ситуацію в Україні між євреями і українцями, про відносини між ними?
О, ні, я не скажу.
Чи вони є?
Ні. Ви далі так. Не євреї, а жиди, все.
The situation has gotten quite scary here, pretty bad, to the point where the rabbi feels he can't walk in the city without bodyguards because he'll get harassed. I've also noticed a lot more swastikas around the city. The problem is that it remains. It remains for tourists to come and see all the swastikas in Lviv. It remains for any Jews who are here to walk by and see their religious symbols on hangmen. And people, everyday ordinary people, just walk by and that becomes normal. And when hate crimes and hate graffiti becomes normal, that's a sign of the sickness of society.
Конечно, некрасиво. Вообще заборы обрисовывать некрасиво.
Attitude, yeah. Simply condemnation.
I think it's terrible, and actually I know some of my friends actually do this, and it's so difficult to convince them that it's wrong.
У мене був однокласник єврей.
І що ти, як ти думаєш, в класі, як до нього ставилися так само, як і до всіх інших?
Ні, ну так же само, ну не дуже. Коротше, обзивали дуже часто єврей.
Стереотипи, вони мають причини. Значить, якщо люди так ставляться до євреїв, значить євреї десь з того заслужили.
І як вони там, євреї, термози.
Я не вважаю себе антисемітом, тому що в наших колах десь ходить така приказка. Антисеміт – це той, хто не любить євреїв більше, ніж вони того заслуговують.
Ви всі почали до нього погано ставитися?
Ну не всі.
Не всі, але багато почав.
Так.
Та нема національної ворожнечі. Ну, от вийдіть от зараз тут на вулиці, кричіть «Я єврей». Ну, я не думаю, що хтось підійде, вас буде бити за то.
Здивується гарантія.
Скоріше...
Просто здивується, так.
Здивується так само, якби ви кричали, що я голубий, чи я там...
Це жит. Він не вірить в Бога. Це життя арабів.
Oh, yeah, those are the children.
Yeah, you know, what I see in this video is it's really hard to follow them in it because they start out with the Nazis were doing this, and then they blame the Soviet army. And then they show what the Soviet army did as filmed by a German Nazi.
Right.
And
but they made it look that way, but that was not the Soviets doing that.
Yeah, well, and you didn't have Germans walking around
doing that.
Yeah, you didn't have Germans walking around with video cameras while the Soviet army was there.
Right. It was misleading in that way.
Yeah. No, they also kind of skewed what people were saying. You know, yes, there is a lot of it there. They have a lot of the, you know, Banderites in that region. You know, it was Polish. So it wasn't even part of the Soviet Union originally. But you had some people, well, it's not bad. Some it's, calling them names. We have that everywhere. We have it in Russia. We have it in the United States. We have it in Canada. We have it in Europe. There's just a group of people who are intolerant of others. There's people in the States who are intolerant of blacks. So it's all, unfortunately, if you go out to make a film, I can go out on the street today and I can pick any neighbor that I want and ask them about any of this, and they have no problem with anybody. But if I'm looking to find somebody who is anti-whatever, I can find them and I can make a film about it. And then classify it as everybody here is like that. So this is the problem with propaganda.
Indeed, indeed. And, I want to take you even further back in history. What we just saw, and I apologize, some of this footage is pretty disturbing, these historical films that we're looking at tonight on the show. I would not subject you to this if I didn't feel that the history was important to revisit right now, because there are a lot of people out there who either forgot, they say never forget, but obviously a lot of people forgot this history, or they just didn't know it in the first place. Some people out there in our audience are seeing these shocking films for the first time tonight, right here on Strange Bedfellows. So I did want to give you guys a trigger alert. I'm sorry, I should have warned you before I played that last clip. And I'm going to take you back 20 years prior to World War II. And what happened during the Russian Civil War. Again, this same region, what we call Galicia, which was then Poland, and the pogroms that occurred in those years.
We will return to Germany and to the rise to power of Adolf Hitler and Nazism later. Let's now go back to the latter days of the First World War and to the collapse of the Russian Empire. As we have already mentioned, a major event that occurred during this time was the Russian Revolution, which took place in 2 stages in late 1917. The revolution would prove to be a defining watershed for the 20th century, ending hundreds of years of Tsarist power and inaugurating nearly 3/4 of a century of communist rule. Throughout the second half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, feelings of dissatisfaction festered among the Russian Empire's population. Rampant governmental corruption, immense poverty, and persisting industrial, social, and economic backwardness all led to a general sense of disillusionment. As a response, numerous discontented groups and parties were formed. One such group were the Bolsheviks, a Marxist revolutionary faction that split from the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party in 1903. The Bolsheviks placed an emphasis on the working class and called for the violent overthrow of capitalism, as well as the formation of a Marxist dictatorship that would accelerate the transition to socialism. The party became increasingly popular among the urban workers and following the First World War, also among soldiers. Following a revolution in February 1917, Julian calendar, which overthrew the Tsar and established a provisional government, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized control of the government in October of that year, Julian calendar, refusing to share power with the other revolutionary groups. The new leaders quickly withdrew from the war and, following what they saw as Marxist communism, worked to nationalize private industry and agriculture in the name of the people. Following this coup, the former Russian Empire was plunged into the chaos of a brutal civil war as several forces sought to consolidate control over its various territories, vying to determine Russia's political future. Both the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War had far-reaching effects on the landscape of the region, causing radical social and political change and bringing about extreme violence. These did not spare the Jews of the former empire, who found themselves becoming equal citizens in the newly formed societal and political structure, but also targets of vicious pogroms.
These pogroms take place in the extraordinary chaos that erupts after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, when you have the Red Army, led by Leon Trotsky, that is fighting against the white forces who want to reinstate the Tsar, want to return to autocracy, and they're fighting on behalf of the abdicated Tsar. And you have the Ukrainian forces, led by Simeon Petliura, who do not want to be under the Soviets, do not want to be under the whites, but they want an independent Ukraine. And then you have a number of peasant insurgent groups who want the land, who want land, and who are suffering because of the economic crisis that was triggered by World War I. So in this extraordinary chaos, you have an eruption of anti-Jewish violence that has not been seen before. 200,000 Jews are killed. 300,000 Jewish children are left as orphans. According to some new studies, 1/3 of Jewish women are raped in public, whereby rape is being used as an instrument of ethnic cleansing. I would even refer to these pogroms almost as a forgotten genocide, because some shtetl are completely wiped off the face of the earth. Now, why are these pogroms so important as far as the interaction between Jews and the state and Jews and non-Jews? Now, most Jews before the pogroms were critical of the Bolsheviks, were against the Bolsheviks. However, in the context of the extraordinary violence that we have in the Civil War, the extraordinary anti-Jewish violence, most Jews will choose the lesser of two evils. They will have to choose the Bolsheviks, because the Bolsheviks, the Red Army, is the only army that does not carry out systematic anti-Jewish violence in the areas of Ukraine and Belarus, whereas the other armies, the other insurgent groups do carry out this kind of violence that is very systematic, also thanks to the fact that it is carried out in a militarized fashion, unlike pogroms before. Of the 1880s, 1903, 1905, the pogroms of the Civil War are carried out in a militarized fashion, especially by the white movement.
Wow. And you know, something that's really important to point out, I was kind of getting to it earlier, how this was politically motivated. It wasn't really motivated by, bias towards their religion. There was a racial component, but it was primarily political. It was the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, that had Germany and Poland and the West so incredibly concerned. And that's why Russia was invaded by 20 different countries after World War I and the revolution. Kevin, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot of what was said in that clip you played is true. But again, they kind of slant it as anti-Soviet Union again. You're getting me the chance to talk about what I was supposed to talk about on my show this morning.
Until technical difficulties intervened.
Till many technical difficulties, yeah.
Darn, I was so looking forward to that too.
Yeah. They talked about the Jews had to pick the lesser of the evils, and there were groups that were, carrying out pogroms against the Jews. Reality is the Bolsheviks were not. A lot of the history people don't understand. Vladimir Lenin was himself a quarter Jew. So, it doesn't make sense that the leader of the Bolsheviks, was carrying out mass murders against Jews.
And I've read a lot of oral histories from that period from the people who survived the pogroms, and they all say, time after time, I've seen these stories repeated, how they talked about the whites, or what would become the Ukrainian nationalists, would come riding into their village, burn it down, take everybody out and shoot them, rape the women, kill the kids. It was horrific. And every time it was the Red Army who came riding into town and took care of it, put down the pogrom, nursed the wounded, buried the dead, ran those bandits out of town. And they did this in village after village after village from 1919 through 1921. It was just a constant thing that Lenin and Stalin and the Bolsheviks had to deal with, was putting down pogrom after pogrom after pogrom. And, they say that the Red Army were their heroes. They came in and saved the day, and then they did it again in World War II. They were the ones who liberated most of the concentration camps.
Well, Stalin's third wife was Jewish. Trotsky, his actual name was Bronstein. So if that tells you anything, and of course they talked about him in that clip. A majority of the leaders in even the times of the Tsars were Jewish or had Jewish wives. So it isn't something that really is, a big problem here. Do we have anti-Semitism? Absolutely. Everybody has it to some extent. But I don't know. What can let me do this. I read a thing from the Chechens. We're hearing right now about the Muslim population of Russia, all up in arms about the Israelis and refugees. And I read something for Rick from the Chechens that said, these people have fought with us for ages. They live amongst us. The Jews fight with us in the special military operation. Today in Russia is National Unity Day, hence my background here. And this was a statement by soldiers on the front lines in Ukraine. It says, "We come to congratulate everybody in our motherland on National Unity Day. Today, here Muslims, Orthodox Christians, Catholics, Jews, fighters of all religions and nationalities are defending our land from the Nazis, so that the people of Russia can live calmly and safely, so that every child can grow up with pride in our country and with respect for everyone around the world. We are all equal here, and we are all for each other, and you be for each other and for us in a peaceful land." This is the general attitude of Russians. Putin's statement about the Israel-Palestine conflict, Lavrov's statement, Lavrov did, his statement was a hair harsh, but I've got it here somewhere. But he said it's impossible to eliminate Hamas without destroying Gaza along with the majority of the civilian population. That's usually where the West ends his quote, saying, see, they're against Israel, or they're against Palestine, they're, whatever. But he says the destruction of Gaza with the expulsion of civilians who number about 2 million people will lead to a catastrophe for decades, if not centuries. So there is this real view here that the civilian Palestinians are being massacred by the Israeli government. And the Israeli civilians are being massacred by the Hamas terrorists. So it's really about the people that Russia stands behind. They don't stand behind Hamas. They don't stand behind the Zionist government. They stand behind the people of both sides.
I think that's what a lot of people in the West are struggling with right now, to understand what's going on in Russia. And they're trying to figure out, why was Putin meeting, or why was these Russian diplomats, why were they meeting with Hamas?
Actually, they didn't meet with Hamas. Hamas showed up unannounced and they were refused.
That's not the way it's been reported. Would that surprise you in the West?
It does not surprise me.
Yeah.
They did show up. They did go to the Kremlin and they were refused an audience.
Very interesting. Very
So
interesting.
Putin said, I want to draw attention to the heads of all regions, heads of law enforcement agencies, and special services to the need for firm, timely, and clear actions to protect the constitutional system of Russia and the rights and freedoms of all of our citizens, interethnic and interreligious, to provide harmony.
Well, that's striking the right chord. That's what we needed to hear Putin say. It caused a lot of alarm over here in the West, let me tell you.
But you did not hear him say that. You wanted to delve into the history a little bit. The first Jewish state was originally proposed for not only Crimea, but they called it Crimean California. It was Crimea and that region going up through Kherson and Odessa all the way over to where Romania is. It was supposed to be that big area, which was proposed initially. And Stalin agreed to that in the mid to late 20s. And they had some, I don't remember the number, 75, 95,000 Jews move into the area. Right. But as what happened is they were funded by Jewish organizations in the United States, and the Soviet Union gave them money to relocate there and start communities. And the locals started complaining and rising up against them. And again, was it a pogrom? Maybe, I don't know. But the people were against these well-off Jews with lots of money settling in this entire region, and it was causing problems. So as what Stalin did in 27 is he actually created a Jewish region in, it's often said in Siberia, but it's actually out in the Far East. It's right on the border of China and Mongolia, right in the corner down there. It's not a wonderful place.
Well, he sent them to no man's land, but
he sent them to no man's
the pogroms would not find them there.
Exactly.
Right.
Because the people would leave them alone, is what I was told by Dimitri this morning. Is in the summer it is hot and humid, and in the winter it is cold. So it sounds kind of like northern Florida to me. And there were, right now there's about 75,000 people there. 10% of them are Jewish. Their population has been 10 to 11% all along. But this was the same time that we had the Balfour Memorandum that Britain proposed, along with, making promises to 20 other countries to get their way, with the intention of keeping none of them. And, we actually have a town not too far from us, about 30 kilometers away, 12, 14 miles from us. It's named Inkerman. And where do you think the name Inkerman came from? It's a Jewish city in Crimea. We have 3 synagogues here. And nobody bothers any of the Jews here. But, this is the territory that these well-off Jews wanted and their wives. They wanted the warm, temperate climes, and instead they were given, BF Egypt.
Right.
So,
right. Not the
and then at
prime
the-
real estate for sure out there.
Yeah.
But
Then
Crimea
this was brought up
certainly
again
is.
this was brought up again at the Yalta conference,
Mhm.
and it was Roosevelt who he kind of led Stalin in this a little bit with some unfair statements. He said, "Stalin, I'm a Zionist. How about you?" And Stalin said, in principle, I am, but there's problems with this movement. And this is the reason why he supported that in Palestine. That and the
Soviet
fact that
Union was like the first country to vote at the United Nations for the creation of Israel.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Rick said earlier. It was a political thing, though. They wanted a Jewish state in Palestine because they sent many Soviet military men, leaders there, Jewish leaders, to help arm them, to help train them, to, who were the guys that were the enemies of the Soviet Union at the time? The Arabs. So you plant a bunch of Russians, Jewish Russians, in the middle of Palestine, have them train a bunch of Jews, and you have what we have today.
And what's interesting is for several years, Stalin forbade his citizens to migrate to the new state of Israel. The Jews were not allowed to leave for several years. He wanted to keep them, I guess, in his mind, safe at home in the Soviet Union, and he felt that the Red Army could adequately protect them. He liked that idea of autonomous zones to protect them, and I understand the reasons why, because it's sort of like that planned migration, the planned original Jewish state or settlement in Crimea, for example. That movement started in the early to mid 20s, and the whole reason for it, if I understand it correctly, was to prevent the pogroms that were still a very recent memory of 1919, 20, and 21. And the threats against Jews specifically and communists, because there was this, I think of it as a mental illness that the Nazis had, that the Ukrainian nationalists had, where they conflated Bolshevism and Judaism. They called it Judeo-Bolshevism. And I know it's kind of a complex subject, so I have a short clip to show you here that kind of explains.
Can I ask you a question, Kevin?
Yeah.
So this is a report. This is New York Post, a lot of them. And they're saying here that the Russian foreign ministry officials met with Hamas leaders, Bassem Naim and Musa Abu Marzouk.
That's what we're being told.
So you're saying that didn't happen?
I am saying that did not happen. There was an official release from Peskov saying that they were denied an audience at the Kremlin.
But it says here also that they posed for a picture with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov.
Right.
So that didn't happen?
Well, I don't know if they have a
Are the
picture of
pictures
it.
fake?
They was probably with them.
Yeah.
So
much confusion. Nobody knows what to believe.
I don't even know who Bogdanov is.
Okay.
Interesting. Well, let's ponder that while we watch
Is he
this clip.
Is he a funny?
The Russian Revolution had additional implications on the way Jews were treated and perceived, both inside and outside of what would become the Soviet Union. Firstly, under the Bolsheviks, Jews were granted civil equality and anti-Semitism was outlawed. However, as we will soon see, the Bolshevik definition of Judaism and Jewishness would also greatly limit their religious and national freedom, affecting their treatment and the way others perceived them. An additional outcome of the revolution and the events following it was the growing fusion of Jews and revolutionary movements, especially Bolshevism. As discussed in last week's lesson, this perception already began to appear in the late 19th century. Following the Russian Revolution and its aftermath, it became even more widespread. Let's turn to examine these developments further.
The Bolshevik Revolution seemed to open up glorious new opportunities for some Jews, among many other peoples and classes, but it carried within it the seed of destruction for Jewish culture in areas of the former Russian Empire that fell under long-term communist control, because ultimately the communists defined Jewish identity in narrowly ethnic terms and were opposed to both traditional religious culture as well as to Hebrew and Zionist culture, and so only certain forms of Yiddish culture were initially cultivated and tolerated under Soviet rule, and eventually that too came to be extinguished in the 1950s. And even more catastrophic than the impact of communism on as the sort of pluralistic diversity of Jewish culture in the former Russian Empire was the linkage that developed between European anti-communism and anti-Semitism, because to the extent that Jews were somewhat disproportionately represented in the ranks of communist movements, and initially in the Soviet Union and in other parts of Europe, and to the extent that Jews more broadly were disproportionately represented among movements of the left, including social democratic movements, and insofar as Marx had been of Jewish heritage, even if he was an anti-Semite himself, it was easy to put a Jewish face on communism. It was completely distorting and manipulative to do so, but it was an easy propagandist link for anti-communists and anti-Semites to make and to find common ground on. The Nazis exploited this ruthlessly. The myth of the Żydokomuna, of the Judeo-communist conspiracy, was a powerful political force in Poland in the 1930s and into the 1940s. And so this perception, however misleading and distorted, of communism as being some kind of aspect of a Jewish conspiracy against Christianity, private property, and European civilization, was to prove literally lethal for Jews in the context of rising anti-Semitism in interwar Europe, and then obviously in the context of the Holocaust, which I think would have it cannot be reduced to that element, but the linkages are striking.
Where'd she go?
Hey, Rick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So to answer your question,
yeah,
like I say, Hamas did not come to, well, Hamas went to Russia, to Moscow, and was refused an audience. Bogdanov said that on Thursday, that previous Thursday, during his visit to Qatar, leadership of the Palestinian movement. So we can assume that's Hamas, but that was while he was in Qatar.
So what's that? This picture that they've attached to these stories.
I would say this is a picture from Qatar. That's what I would guess.
Here. So we've got says senior Hamas officials Bassam Naim and Musa Abu Marzouk and Russia's deputy foreign minister Mikhail Bogdanov met for talks in Moscow Thursday. And there's a photo, and that's from Reuters.
Yes. And that Thursday was actually in Qatar.
So that's in Qatar, not in Moscow?
That's in Qatar, not Moscow.
Okay, because they're saying it's in Moscow, but whatever. Nevertheless, is that not them meeting?
Yeah, it's this
they met.
This deputy foreign minister, a special representative for the Middle East is what he is, and chairman of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society.
Okay.
But in Moscow,
it's not like they sat down and had a face-to-face with Putin. It's not like that.
Right. They did arrive in Moscow, but they were turned away in Moscow.
Okay. So I'm just reading the caption. It says that's in Moscow, but whatever. Nevertheless, they had a meeting with a guy who's a government dude, but it's not Putin. It's not like that, but
yeah. From what I see here,
I absolutely see the battle lines being drawn, the alliances or the axis being formed. I see, Russia obviously aligned with Iran. Some of these countries are lining up on this side. These guys are lining up on that side. These guys are pro-American. Egypt is, more inclined to sort of be on the U.S.-Israeli side, but not fully committed because, you have all these complex things going on. Everybody's picking a side essentially, and you can see that this is all lining up according to this multipolar new geopolitical reality that we find ourselves in. And it's not just about anti-Semitism. It isn't just about, who hates Jewish people. It's the new geopolitical reality that is propelling us toward a third world war. That's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
You've got North Korea aligning with Russia and aligning with the Palestinians now.
Yeah.
North Korea's, I saw a report this morning of some Ukrainian soldiers saying that you can hear a Soviet era artillery shell coming at you. You hear it coming. But the North Korean artillery shells, there's something in the design of them. They're silent. They hit them with no warning with those. So, Russia denies getting, weapons from, Iran and North Korea, but reality is it's happening.
Yeah. And as I've said, anti-Semitism today is this anti-Semitism is sort of a postmodernist political anti-Semitism. It's rooted in political motivations and anti-Semitic tropes that have roots in anti-Jewish prejudices and cliches that are sort of present within the history of even anti-Jewish Christian bigotry.
Yeah,
it extends, into every country. It's so it becomes kind of complex and almost you can't explain it to some degree, but you can, and it manifests itself in strange ways, even here in Canada. So, Lori isn't going to want to see this, but you go to just here in Canada. Sorry, Marxists, communists here in Canada, they're aligning they're actually lining up with the fascists because they've bought into the anti-Semitic rhetoric, which has been cloaked in this new, I would call it like, let's call it woke fascism. Okay. And they're buying into it. So you go to the Marxist.ca website and you're finding all kinds of it there. Are you a communist on the top? But then it says, what can communists do to free Palestine? And then you read this release from them and you scroll down. I mean, it's very, I would say it's anti-Semitic. And then I did say on my program that this has woven its way into the freedom movement in Canada. And I've been listening to, it's very pro-communist rhetoric that is now flowing from this populist movement, which is part of the freedom movement. It's becoming very weird and it's anti-Semitic at the same time. And yes, I'm sorry, but there are people within, as we've seen, people within the freedom movement who want to overthrow our government. Now there are Marxists who want to overthrow our government. And Lori sent me a message and, friendly, but she said, communists don't want to overthrow your government. But then right in this release, it says right in here that, right here, above all, we need to overthrow our own imperialist government in Canada. I didn't make it up. It's right there. People's heads are exploding, man. It's like we are in so much trouble because everybody is just picking a side. And strangely, it seems it's just leading us down these paths to the same mistakes that we've made in the past. I understand it. It's hard to wrap your head around how can the fascists and the communists be lining up together against the Jews? It's right there, man.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Well,
it's the craziest goddamn thing I've ever seen, Rick. I have to tell you.
It is, but
I talked to my communist friends about it. And of course, the reason that they align themselves with Palestine, there's a number of reasons, but
oppressed versus the oppressor, they're automatically defaulting to the side of the victim.
And it's an alliance that's been in
the
place
supposed victim.
since
Right,
the 50s.
supposed victims, yes.
Yeah. I mean, Stalin kind of switched sides in the 50s. They were in the Soviet Union after Stalin died, and started to align themselves with their former enemies.
I'm not giving Stalin a pass. He killed a lot of people, man. He killed a lot of people, and he killed his
a lot of
political
Nazis,
opponents.
that's for sure.
And it wasn't just. And one day he's recorded saying a lot of anti-Semitic things. The next day he's passing declarations to protect the Jews. He's all over the map because he's, like I said, as far as I'm concerned, he's just like a gangster politician who did whatever he had to do to further his political agenda, which was communism. And if he had to break a few omelets or a few eggs to make an omelet, he broke a lot of eggs. He broke a lot.
Well, you know what, Winston Churchill.
It's all in the past anyway. But man,
what Winston Churchill said about Stalin. He said that Stalin was a mystery wrapped inside an enigma, wrapped inside a mystery or something like that.
Yeah.
And he was, because here's a man who saved the Jews of Europe, while at the same time they say he himself was anti-Semitic, yet he had a Jewish wife.
But but on the one hand, he's like forming an alliance with Hitler, and he's saying, hey, let's carve up Europe. You come on in, you take half of Poland, and I'll take the other half. And to hell with the Jews over there. During that time, it wasn't until Hitler finally broke the agreement, which he expected he would at some point. It had been weakened by his war with the Allies, which was a strategic move. He didn't give a damn, right? It was like, do I get what I want? Or we'll just carve it up. Just don't attack me. That's not saving the Jews. That's just doing what you think is in your best political interests at the time. I'm sorry. He was no saint, man.
Strange bedfellows, my friend. Strange bedfellows.
That's right.
The Autonomous Republic actually wasn't meant to save the Jews. They were tinkerers. They were craftsmen, they were, sellers, marketers, and this went against the Soviet flow. So by moving them way off into BF Egypt over there in, the Far East, the goal was to get them to start farming. So that was that deal. Now, making the agreement with Hitler, that was done specifically because he knew that they were going to attack the Soviet Union. And it was a delay tactic so that they could prepare more.
Yep.
So I'll defend him on that point. Did he make agreements with Hitler? Absolutely. It was to delay things, though. And yes, this goes into that whole, Jewish thing. Are you for the Jews? Are you against them? And it's a big political thing anyway, because, yes, he saved 8-9 million Jews from the Holocaust. But was his goal to save them? Or was his goal to save 22 million Soviets? They lost a lot more people than the Jews did.
That's
Yet
correct.
we make the big thing about, the Holocaust was about the Jews.
Right.
Hey, a lot
Everyone
of Soviets
forgets
lost their
about
lives.
the 20 million other Soviets who lost their lives in that war.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
they were sent to concentration camps as well.
Yes.
So it's like you say, Rick, ultimately it's all governments and politics. You get to the people like us, and that's what matters.
Yeah. I agree with that. And, and it gets really complicated because you have a lot of Palestinians dying too, right? So, well, you have to protect the Palestinians. But what about the Jewish state? Well, if they pull the funding for military aid to Israel, well, then the anti-Jewish forces there will just roll right over Israel and exterminate them. And it can go the other way too. And we're witnessing that on the other side. So it's like, this is crazy on either side. You can't really win. They talk about Nuremberg 2.0 because of the pandemic and the crimes against humanity that way. Well, I'll tell you, I think there might be a Nuremberg 2.0 at the end of all this because of the war crimes we're seeing on all sides. All sides. And you might have to, somebody, a third party, I don't know who, because it seems like everybody's going to be guilty at the end of this, but somebody should be dragging all these people in front of a trial at the end of this and holding them accountable for their war crimes. But who's going to do that when everybody's picking a side? Well, unfortunately, it seems like history repeating itself in this way too. The victor gets to write the history. That's a dangerous thing.
Absolutely.
And one last thing I wanted to touch on.
We grew up, the United States won World War II.
Of course we did. in Europe, huh? Well, if you fell asleep in history class, or depending on what they taught you in history class, that's the version of events that most Americans and Brits and probably Canadians believe is true. I just saw this report come across. This was just filed today, actually, by Voice of America. And oddly enough, it's about Galicia. We were just talking about the events of, the Ukrainian nationalists, the pogroms in that very land where all that occurred. This report just came across the wire, and I'm going to play it for you right now.
To all the members of the Drohobych, Borislav, Truskowitz communities.
The fall of 2019. This amateur footage captures a historic moment. David Avigdor, a rabbi from New Haven, Connecticut, enters the Choral Synagogue, a place of worship his grandfather, chief rabbi of Drohobych Yaakov Avigdor, exited 80 years before.
It was an honor not only to the Avigdor family who survived the Holocaust, but to all those we remember today. 7 young Hasidim from Kyiv in the U.S. accompanied Rabbi Avigdor during his visit.
Drohobych, a town in western Ukraine, was one of the Jewish centers of Galicia before World War II. Yaakov Avigdor held his final service here on Yom Kippur in September 1939. shortly after the start of the war. In recent years, Drohobych resident Leonid Goldberg has seen war up close both in Israel and Ukraine. He came under fire in 2019 when visiting his friends in southern Israel and had to hide in a mamad, a reinforced security room inside the apartment. In 2023, Russian rockets hit his hometown in Ukraine.
Children killed in Irpin, Bucha, Mariupol, and children killed in southern Israel. This is the new Nazism we face in the 21st century. Ukraine has been at war for 10 years. Israel has been repelling attacks since its founding. These two countries are now confronting global evil.
A local tour guide and publicist, Goldberg doesn't share Jewish roots with those who built the 158-year-old synagogue. His father hailed from Kharkiv and his mother from Donetsk. The family moved to Drohobych during Soviet times. Most native Drohobych Jews were killed during the Holocaust, and today Goldberg is doing what he can to preserve the region's unique historical heritage.
The last pre-war Jew of Drohobych died in 2015. It was Alfred Schreier, an outstanding musician and incredibly cultured man.
Маленька міщина, де моя єдина кохала мене.
At the beginning of the 20th century, there were 3 Roman Catholic churches, 7 Orthodox churches, and 17 synagogues in Drohobych. Today there are no practicing rabbis here, but a lot of people caring for the tradition. This commitment has grown into an educational center.
In 2022, Yurkevich found himself defending Ukraine in the east. He remembers a friend from synagogue, helping however he could.
He always passes a lot of matzah to the front line. When vehicles with provisions couldn't reach us, the guys would come, and I'd distribute Jewish bread, as they call it. It helped a lot because matzah doesn't go bad.
The Choral Synagogue of Drohobych underwent a decade-long restoration funded by charity organizations and is now the largest synagogue in western Ukraine, operated by one of the smallest Jewish communities. The Star of David intertwined with the Ukrainian trident, a symbolic emblem depicted on Goldberg's kippah. He enters the doors of the city's synagogue every day, hoping all the wars in this world will forever remain beyond these walls. Marianos Shudlyak for VOA News from Drohobych, Ukraine.
I'm sure you had some thoughts on that, Kevin. Go ahead.
Well, you know, the rabbi had it right. Ukraine's been at war for the last 10 years.
Yes.
So at least he's honest about that.
Is that the only honest thing you heard in that report?
You know, I'll say this. You know, we hear about the Ukrainian Nazis, and this is propaganda on the other side now. Yes, there are Nazis in Ukraine. You know, there's Nazis in the United States for that matter. The problem of Nazism in Ukraine isn't as big as the Russian press would make it out to be. Yes, they have it. It tends to be the Galicia end of Ukraine, you know, the Banderites. But in general, when we talk to our friends there isn't that big of an issue with Nazis in most of Ukraine. So, you know, again, it's propaganda. And this is what people need to understand is, you know, talk to people wherever you're, you know, considering what you're considering. And if you can't talk to people there, talk to people who can talk to people there. You know, there's bad things going on by the Ukrainians against the Western Ukrainians. Absolutely. Have been for years. You know, did Western Ukrainians take up arms against Eastern Ukrainians? Absolutely. Did Crimea vote to leave Ukraine? Yes. You know, it isn't as clear of a picture as people tend to make it. It isn't a black and white thing.
It is
Never
extremely complex history. You know, I've dug deep into it. It fascinates me. And yeah, I think that the history is important to remember, to understand, and we've tried our best to educate, to unravel that history, especially for people like us in the West who we just weren't taught this stuff in the United States. I don't know what they teach in Canada, but it's probably a lot like what we learned here. A lot of it depends on where you went to school, what you were taught. And looks like Rick has a video clip queued up there of, is that Stu Peters?
That's Stu Peters.
Oh, yay. Let's talk about Stu Peters.
Yeah.
This is his moment. This is a moment just made for a guy like Stu Peters.
Well, yeah, I mean, let me preface that with, you know, we talked about the Nazi party in Canada that's sort of being formed with a Thunderbird nationalist party, right? And then this is their emblem, right? Which is a carbon copy, basically, of the emblem from Nazi Germany in World War II. But Kevin is quite right to point out that you really have to talk to the people, because in my neighborhood on the corner, there's a Palestinian, there's a Jewish guy who lives over there. You know, I've got a Muslim friend 2 doors down, and we all get along. And there's really no issues in my neighborhood. We're all fine, right? But there are people trying to ramp everything up, and there are people with political motivations. That's what that guy promoting this new party in Canada is all about. But last night he's a First Nations guy, and it's an ethno-nationalist movement that is First Nations based for this new party. And yet last night, who did I have on the program? We had Carmel, who is a First Nations woman who was pushing back because she realized that he was basically tricking her, duping her and other people into following him with this new twisted sort of cloaked language and using new words that mean different things to tell, the age-old story of, how the world is being oppressed by Jews without actually using the word Jew, right? And we've been seeing this, especially over the last 3 years, with these anti-Semitic stories that are not being told using the word Jew. It's anti-Semitism without Jewish people in it, where it is, the world is being controlled by the elites who control banking, who control the pharmaceutical industry, who control the media. They're in complete control, and they're shadowy figures. You're never really quite sure who they are. And this story is being told by people like Stu Peters, who is now really coming right out and actually putting his anti-Semitism, his anti-Jewish feelings on full display for people, and receiving even media awards for doing it. And he's doing it alongside other influencers like Ye or Kanye West or whatever you want to call him.
Fuentes.
Yes, Nick Fuentes, people like that. And there are, others as well. And, here he is. And what does he want to do as a result? Where does this lead? Well, to this.
Yeah, that's weird. So we talked as we exited the last segment that we were going to start talking about what accountability looks like. Okay, because I want to go on the record again and just say the people that have perpetuated these crimes against humanity, when they're found guilty in a court of law, should be executed. They should be hanged or shot in the brain. These people should face.
They should definitely face the ultimate
extreme accountability.
Yeah.
And you see where it goes real quick. And, and this is a guy who has a lot of followers, who's built a huge audience. And I'm sorry, folks, to tell you this, but a lot of what you've been hearing, and even some of this, I didn't recognize it for a long time. But they're pulling people down into that rabbit hole, which is, it's been an indoctrination leading to this moment, where they're now pivoting and taking the masks off and saying, look, we had the answer all along. It's those people over there. And who are the Jews? Well, today it is Jewish people, but it's more than that. It's anybody they really point their finger at and say, it's that guy there, it's that doctor over there, it's this politician. And if they're not Jewish, then they're just the Gentiles. They're the pedophiles who are vulnerable to being exploited and controlled. They recruit those people and pay them off and say, we won't convict you if you do our bidding, and we'll put you into a position of power because we can control you because you're a pedophile or you're an adulterer or whatever other.
Or you were blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein.
That's right.
Right? That's why you have to support Israel, because they've got the Mossad's got the dirt on you.
That's exactly right. Or Donald Trump, we've got him on the PP tape or, whatever it might be. Okay. And so that's how this story is being told, but it's all leading to the same place where it's always led. From the time of the death of Christ, where it was the Romans who killed Jesus, they executed him, but ultimately it became
the fault of the Jews.
Yep. Okay, so this goes back over time, and we need to be very careful about it because this really is history repeating itself again.
Oh, and it's even weirder this time because I've seen, Rick, and I won't name names, but I've seen several left-wing socialist accounts, even friends of mine, since this war started, retweeting the likes of Stu Peters, retweeting the likes of Nick Fuentes, and going, yeah, what he said, absolutely.
Yep.
And then you go, okay, now this is getting really weird because what a lot of people, my friends on the left, might not understand, and I would like my friends on the left and my communist friends to understand that Nazism and the worship and adulation of Adolf Hitler is still very much a thing in the Palestinian liberation movement of today. I'm going to show you something here that might just open your eyes. There is a line of clothing stores, I kid you not, in Gaza City, called Hitler. There's a Hitler 1 and a Hitler 2 because they're so popular. They've got 2 stores in the city of Gaza. Now, considering the bombing campaign and the airstrikes, I don't know if these stores are still standing right now or if they're open or closed or a pile of rubble, but it's a thing in Arab culture, and it's not just in Palestine, it's all throughout the Arab world. They call it Hitler chic, and a lot of the fashionable young men today are really into it. And I'm gonna show you the clothing store in Gaza. Take a look at this, guys. This is
اسم المحل هتلر، وانا بحبه يعني من كتر ما هو كان اكتر واحد معادي لليهود، لانه ظلمونا ويعني اخذوا حقنا، كل حقنا اخذوه في البلد، يعني ما خلوناش اشي. يعني احنا الحين بس نروح نموت احسن، احنا عايشين من قلة الموت. وعجبني كمان يعني اللبس، هو احلى حاجة فيه اللبس، والاسم يعني تبعه روعة. لا مكشف.
أنا والله كنت شايف الإعلان هذا على الفيسبوك، أجيت حبيت أشوف المحل لأنه السكينة والكوفية والهذا صار رمز من رموز انتفاضة الأقصى، وحبيت يعني أجي على المحل وأشتري منه، عجبتني يعني الفكرة إنه قصة مساندة مع أهلنا بالقدس والضفة يعني وعجبتني يعني الفكرة كلها.
أنا مارق بدي أشتري أواعي، فلفت انتباهي المحل انه بيعبر عن رمز الانتفاضه في الضفه، ويعني هذه الشغلات مسانده لاهلنا في الضفه، قصه السكين والكوفيه واللتمه، حاجات حلوه تلفت الانتباه، ويعني اشي حلو ومميز كمان، حاجات حلوة كتير.
From a few years back, I should tell you. You probably figured that out by now. And this is in no way to diminish the pain, the suffering of Gaza, of the innocent civilians in Gaza who've suffered these airstrikes now for 3 weeks, almost a month. It's
But it brings up questions for me, though.
That. Your question is?
It brings up questions for me.
Yeah.
We hear about the poor Palestinians who don't have jobs, only a very select few are allowed to go to Israel to work and earn money. Everybody else is dying. Who has the money to buy this stuff? And I'm going to couple that with something that Arkady told me a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Israel and Palestine. He said, Israelis go to Gaza City to buy stuff all the time. So who's buying this?
That's a good question. Are they locals or are they tourists? Maybe from Egypt or wealthier countries who are on a tour. Thought it was an interesting, I don't know if it's in a touristy area of the city, or again, if that place even still stands. And again, while I hate these airstrikes, I hate seeing the suffering of all these innocent people. Honestly, if they hit that store right there,
you'd be okay with it?
I'd be okay with that one store being destroyed, yeah. And maybe its sister store, Hitler too. Give me a break. There's a lot more to be said. I could go much deeper on the history of that subject, but we'll save that for another time because we are, in fact, unfortunately, out of time. But man, this has been a really interesting conversation.
I want to remind people, he who forgets history is doomed to relive it.
Exactly.
So when people tell you history doesn't matter, it matters.
That's right. That's why this show was so important for me to do tonight.
And you've had, well, since you two are the strange ones, I must be the bedfellow.
Cute.
But Rick had, Bitcoin Bob. I kind of like Bitcoin Bob.
Did you?
But I think next week you need to have an Illuminati conspiracist on. We haven't heard from them in this whole deal.
Yeah, Rick knows a few of those guys. I'm sure he can find somebody.
Yeah, there you go.
Sometimes I watch Maverick News and I go, Rick, where do you find these people?
I wonder this all the time.
Where do you find these people, man?
They find me, guys. They find me.
I knew it. And see, we find each other. That's how we found Kevin Michelizzi. And I hope, folks, that if you're not already watching his channel, he has an excellent channel called American in Crimea. And also the InfoWars, is it InfoWars Press? Is your other channel?
Press, yeah.
Yeah, and they're all just part of the Maverick News Network. I hope you'll go subscribe to his channels. You'll see a lot of great stuff on there. He's done a whole series about the history of the Soviet Union that I think you'll love. But we are out of time. Folks, thank you so much for watching Strange Bedfellows, and we'll see you back here next Saturday night. Good night and peace.
In a universe full of ideas, we draw lightness from the dark to a place where opposites attract. Right meets left, positive touches negative, sparking an explosion of truth. Because politics makes strange